In this session, we're going to kind of drill down on Photoshop's color management. Okay. You'll do Lightroom's color management as a separate segment. So basically, you come into Color Settings, Command-Shift-K.
Control-Shift-K.
Yeah, for PC.
PC users.
And this is the default North American General Purpose 2 settings, which I immediately change.
Okay.
I go to More Options, which gives you more options.
So fancy that.
Yes. Under Working Spaces, and we've talked about the fact that Working Spaces is really a color space for editing within Photoshop or Lightroom.
The buckets.
The buckets. In this case, the default is sRGB.
No.
We want to change that to ProPhoto RGB.
Yes.
Or at least I do.
I agree. I concur.
I would leave the CMYK settings where they are. Now, my suggestion, if you're a photographer and you're working back and forth between RGB and grayscale images, which you often might, to change the gray space, there's a gray color space. It's all gray. Just white to black with gray in between. But they actually have a profile for the gray space. And my suggestion is to change it to match the gamma of your RGB color space. So ProPhoto RGB has a gamma, and what a gamma is really kind of a gamma correction curve.
The slope of the curve.
The slope of the curve. And 2.2, which sRGB and Adobe RGB has, is a higher curve, and 1.8 is a little bit lower curve. That basically is the working spaces. I don't ever set the spot because I'm not doing CMYK in this. If you were actually working in graphic arts, you would want the gray space to match the dot gain of your CMYK profile. But we're photographers here.
Right.
Under color management policies, my recommendation is always preserve the embedded profiles. So if what you don't want is what Andrew Rodney calls mystery meat. Once you take meat out of a can, you have no idea whether it's spam or canned ham or what it is. It's just mystery meat. So an RGB file that has no embedded profile, you have no idea what the color is supposed to be. So always embed the profile.
That's like it's speaking a language that nobody knows how to translate.
Yes. Now, under profile mismatches and missing profiles, if the working space is different than the file that you're opening, you have a couple of options. Nag warnings, the dialogs. That used to be on by default. Now Adobe has decided we've been nagged enough.
We're now grown-ups?
Yes. So profile mismatches, as long as you have the preserve embedded profiles checked, if you open an sRGB or an Adobe RGB, it will use that embedded profile as the working space. So you don't need to do transforms.
Right.
And the less transforms, the better. Ask when pasting. If you take an RGB image from Adobe RGB into ProPhoto RGB, it's a profile mismatch, so you got to figure out what you want to do. Well, always embed the profile, then Photoshop will automatically transform from the one space to the other space.
Right.
And then missing profiles, ask when opening. Generally speaking, when you're saving for the web, color management for the web is still in its early stages. Safari and Google,
Chrome,
and Firefox will respect embedded profiles, but the problem is that a profile adds physical weight to the file size. So if you've got a photograph heavy environment, embedding the profile really can increase the amount of file size on your web server. I don't bother with the missing profiles. Photoshop will assume that it's in the working space. If it isn't, then you'll see that it's kind of odd and different. Under the conversion options, Adobe Ace Apple CMM, and Color Gear CMM, I definitely recommend leaving it at Adobe Ace. That is Thomas Knoll's work, and I think it's optimal. You can select what the default rendering intent is when you do a mode change. Okay, I tend to do a convert to profile instead of mode change, so I would not go up under RGB and then do a conversion to CMYK. I would actually use the convert to profile command, and I can show that briefly. Use black point compensation. At this point, I don't think there's any reason left anymore not to use that. Let me explain actually what a CMM actually is. A CMM is a color management module. It's the engine that does the actual color transform from one profile to another. So built in by ICC is the ability to do white point to white point matching. So if your working space and your output space are different white points, the CMM will take that into account in addition to translating the colors. What the ICC has not incorporated is black point. So you want to match your white to the white, the color to the color, and Thomas added the ability to do black point, so black point to black point. That makes sense.
That's great. It makes sense, so why wasn't it there in the first place?
Well,
rhetorical question.
Okay. They haven't gotten around to it. I wouldn't be surprised to actually see ICC adopt black point compensation. Mm-hmm. And the new for CS5 is compensate for scene referred profiles. There is a scene referred and an output referred profiles. Generally, I just leave that checked. Now, under advanced controls, I suggest that you do not modify this at all. Okay? This is like giving a kid a razor blade or sending your child out on the freeway. It's dangerous. The desaturate monitor colors by a certain percent. You know, if you've got a big gamut of color and you want to have it appear on the screen smaller, you could use that. But then you're not really going to be seeing what you think you're seeing. Mm-hmm. And then the blend using gamma 1 is a way of altering the way in which layers are blended. And for photographic purposes, I don't see that.
We have to always remember that Photoshop has primarily been a graphic arts pre-press tool.
Yeah.
And its usefulness to photographers is certainly very real, and it's still the 800-pound gorilla of the photographic world. But there are a lot of tools in here for pre-press and graphic arts that don't really concern us.
And now video and science and industrial uses and 3D. Yeah. It is, it's an 800-pound gorilla.
If you don't know what a particular checkbox is, don't check it.
Yeah. So basically, what then I suggest people do is actually save the workspace. Mm-hmm. Click Save, and then you can
call it Jeff's Workspace.
And I can enter in a message. So now I can always be assured that in the color settings, my settings, ProPhoto RGB, Gray Gamma 1.8, Preserve Embedded Profiles, unchecking these and making sure the conversion options are set. This is the basic color settings. It's basic, but it is somewhat advanced. So then
there's a geeky part to this.
Well, it's unavoidable.
Yeah, I know. We have to do it.
But once you set your workspace and make sure that your policies are correct and your conversion options are all set, you really can kind of forget about it. Mm-hmm. And if push comes to shove, you could actually write an action that would set these settings to a specific setting, so that you could run that action and always know that your color settings are correct. Mm-hmm. I will tell you that I have two computers. I've got my main imaging workstation, which I do the imaging on. Then I've got my other workstation that I tend to do my web work and email and stuff like that. The main Photoshop is set up for ProPhoto RGB, but then my second unit that I'm often doing web work on is set to a default color space of sRGB. It's just more convenient.
Sure.
So then if I did want to do a convert to profile, again, I can see the simple or I can see the advanced. So let me just show the advanced. Source is ProPhoto RGB. If I wanted to transform it to sRGB, I would set it there, use black point. I'm not going to flatten.
And this is if you were sending it to a lab.
Yes. So now the image that was ProPhoto RGB is sRGB.
Right.
That's really the primary extent. Once you've got the Photoshop color settings set, then the next thing to deal with is actually the print module, and we'll do that separately.
Right.